Hey everybody, it's Patric Frankso. This is the latest podcast. We're at VaynerMedia in New York City, and I have Josh from Empathy Wines, and I have Sebastian from Making the Web. That's an agency in Germany that does a lot of online digital marketing, social media marketing, website building, things like that. Empathy Wines is obviously one of the more recent ventures for Gary Vaynerchuk, and obviously everybody knows VaynerMedia is very involved in digital marketing and pushing that. So we thought it'd be great to kind of get us around a round table and talk about some of the things maybe that Josh and his team are doing at Empathy to sort of take advantage of the current landscape in digital marketing to push a brand in a very crowded space, a brand new, no history at all, brand new wine brand in a very crowded space. So with that, welcome to the podcast, guys.
Thank you. Thanks, Patric.
So, Josh, I guess I'll just kick it off with what are some of the things. Obviously, the wine business is an extremely competitive space and a very crowded space. How do you even begin as you're entering a space like that to differentiate yourself?
Right. Well, I mean, first off, having Gary Vaynerchuk as the owner and his personal brand is kind of just a different take on all these other wine brands. All these other wine brands, you may not even know who started it. You may not know the founders. That's another thing with us. We like to incorporate Nate and John, the other two co-owners, besides Gary, into the brand. And since we're all kind of doing this through Gary's philosophy of marketing, we can pretty much easily post really whatever we want, and there isn't we have a guideline of staying within the brand and the brand language and trying to keep the brand associated with a specific image and thought that comes to mind. But yeah, I mean, just starting now, we're fortunate that we have social media on our leverage, and yeah, I guess Gary has been a huge help as well, and getting the marketing out there, getting the name out there.
Now, how? Because again, a lot of the people who are listening to this podcast have smaller companies, and they may be in a very competitive market as well, and they're trying to find a way without maybe a Gary Vaynerchuk behind them to separate their brand and to create a space. Did you guys go into Empathy when Nate and Gary, those guys sat down? Did they go into the process saying this is what the space we want Empathy to occupy in the wine business, or did you guys say first and foremost, obviously the product's got to be good, we want to make a great wine, and then sort of figure out what space it's going to occupy within the industry once you were there?
Yeah, I mean, we did kind of just we started it, and we kind of went as we learned and adapted as we went. Of course, Gary has his demographics of entrepreneurs and people seeking to grow and self-development and stuff. So that's kind of what the first demographic was pretty much Gary fans.
Yep.
At first, and now we're trying to grow the brand further than just Gary Vaynerchuk's wine brand.
Absolutely. I think that's a great follow-up too, because obviously having the advantage of Gary allows you to get out of the gate fast and sort of get some initial traction with a brand that you might not be able to get otherwise. But obviously for the brand to thrive long term, it's got to become more than just fans of Gary Vaynerchuk. Exactly. And I think you guys probably right now are at that point where you're really trying to say, we want to cross over. And the product, by the way, if anybody hasn't purchased, you should definitely get on the Empathy website and do that. I'm not even a fan of white wine and rosé. I drink mostly red, but I actually really like their rosé and white, so I would say definitely check it out. So the product is there, but that being the case, I mean, most people, when you think about picking a wine, there's so many to choose from. So crossing over to somebody that maybe isn't even familiar with Gary and making Empathy stand out is going to be a challenge. I know you guys obviously have the wherewithal of Vayner kind of behind you, but what are some of the strategies you guys are planning to implement to kind of cross that bridge?
Sure. Yeah, so definitely the product is first, right? And I actually personally love the fact that the product is really kind of sells itself in a sense of we've had very little scenarios where people like don't like the wine. It's literally been like 2 that I could think of probably. But yeah, the product is amazing, and that's where it starts. And like we actually now are like doing partnerships with like Vino Mofo. So that's one thing, partnerships. Vino Mofo is how we're getting our wines to Australia, Singapore, New Zealand. Okay. And we also just partnered with another company to get our wines out in Canada as well. And so we're reaching out on the like international availability. Me specifically, I do social media for Empathy Wines, and like I guess one thing I'd like to add is community management, which is pretty much what Gary did like in the early stages of his career. You may have heard him talk about how he used to be on Twitter for like hours a day just talking to people about wine. That opportunity is still, something you could do day to day for whatever your business is, really. One tip, I guess, there's a tool on Twitter called TweetDeck, and you just kind of could Google it, called TweetDeck. And on TweetDeck, you could type in every keyword within the niche of your company. So for example, for Empathy Wines, the words we have is empathy wine to see who's just talking about us without actually adding us and like mentioning us in a tweet. So even just in conversation, we could see who's talking about us. We could engage with them. We could, customer service, we could even, couple jabs, couple right hooks if necessary. But yeah, so on mine, I have Empathy Wines, I have food and wine, I have wine in general. So I could literally see everyone talking about wine on Twitter, and that just gives you like this huge pool of people. And a lot of them don't know Gary or don't know Empathy Wines, and this is an opportunity for us to plant the seed. So that is one tip I definitely recommend. That's for any niche.
So you're saying primarily utilizing Twitter, which I think a lot of people utilize Twitter as like a soapbox, if you will, to, they have a thought that comes across their mind, so they use it to put their thought out there. But I think, one of the things you're talking about, I think is super important with Twitter, is use it primarily as a listening device and an opportunity to say, hey, here's some people that are already talking about wine. How can we join in the conversation and add something of value? And it's not necessarily, to your point with the jabs, it's not necessarily saying, hey, somebody's talking about rosé, let me talk to them about, hey, did you check out Empathy Rosé? A lot of times I think it's just a matter of giving a great piece of advice that's wine related about rosé, and then people are pretty savvy to figure out who you are and say, hey, John, Empathy Wines, I've never heard of them, and then they're going to do their own drilling down and finding out. And that's where I think a lot of people, I think, are straight right hooking. Every time they tweet, it's a right hook, or if they engage in a conversation, they're jumping in midstream to a conversation with a right hook before they even introduce themselves. And your point, I think, is great. It's just saying, hey, let's find out when people are talking about wine and just have empathy join the conversation.
Exactly. And back to like the right hooks, if you guys don't know what that means, to the listeners, jab, 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 right hook pretty much just means give, ask. Right, and then the ask usually is in the form of like, hey, check out Empathy Wines, for example, or like we ship directly to consumer, or just going in for like, check out our website. But you just definitely should develop the cadence of like when the right opportunity to like use the jabs and use the right hooks, because it makes people feel like uncomfortable, like if it's not fully like if the jabs weren't there prior.
Well, I think it has to be authentic too. I think anything on social media, whether it's Twitter, anywhere, I think has to be authentic. Definitely. Sebastian, I wanted to ask you, because obviously we're approaching this. Josh and I are doing our business primarily in the United States, but is it different in Europe? I mean, how are people engaging with the platforms there? How would somebody in Europe engage with a brand the same way? Is it very similar, or is the personality? Obviously, there are some differences between cultural differences and things like that. How would you engage with somebody in Europe versus how we're talking about you would do it in the U.S.?
Well, I think it definitely comes back to the channels. Like Twitter in Europe is not a thing at all. I think Twitter is among the number 3 probably here in the United States of the social networks, whereas in Germany, where I'm from, or even Switzerland, you don't really use it. So my question would rather be, what's the second most important social network for Empathy Wines in your opinion? Is it Instagram?
I didn't say Twitter is the first important. I was just throwing that in there. following along his question. But definitely Instagram. But it's all based off your demographics, really.
Okay.
Like, what is your target
But
audience?
then you don't really sell in Europe right now, do you?
No. We have Australia, New Zealand, and Singapore.
Okay.
Yeah.
You have a plan on coming to Europe or Germany?
I think so. Yeah.
I
I mean,
hope so,
we are working
definitely.
on more international availability, like
I think.
as each day goes on.
Yeah, I think for like European market, it's definitely Instagram where you would also jump into the conversation with hashtags or even
So do you
like,
are you following hashtags and then finding out when people are posting against certain hashtags and joining
Yes.
into that? Okay.
You do that and you see the competition. So just get to know the audience of your brand. What do they follow? What topics do they want to talk about? And then jump in.
Okay.
That's something which works pretty well. Or also DM people. And then of course ads, like what we have very good results with is conversion pixels on websites. So people who really use the website get there. You can do custom audiences with it, and you can do lookalike audiences, and then get the traffic back to there. That works pretty well for us as well. And then Facebook, of course. But I think it mainly depends on what the target of your brand is. Like,
Exactly.
What's the conversion? What do you want to reach? Like with the Instagram, is it people to go to the website and just inform about the brand, or really to have them buy the wine?
Oh, for Instagram, ours is more just focusing on the content.
Yeah.
Focusing on making good content. Also, an Instagram tip is so the way I start my days, I guess, in the mornings I get to every DM. And the reason being is because DM is where it shows up where people mentioned us. So people will take photos of the wine and they'll tag us, and that tag will be in our inbox for 24 hours. So we have 24 hours to either repost, respond, thank them, primarily thank them for sharing and for supporting the brand, and that just builds like kind of something that like all these other brands like may not be able to offer, which is like kind of like a personal connection as well as just like kind of like a friendship. Like people were like, wow, like I wasn't expecting like you to respond, or like I wasn't expecting you to reply to my tweet, but like just having that conversation. So yeah, Instagram, we focus on content, and then really just that's another thing is what I just mentioned was the DMs.
Now, how do you guys, both of you guys, this is a question for both of you guys, how do you advise either a client in Sebastian's or, with the brand, from Josh's perspective, the cadence of Instagram stories versus Instagram post? And what do you feel like is, when you're making the decision whether this goes to a story or whether this goes to a post, what are you guys using? Because I think a lot of people that maybe aren't as into it as we are, still struggle with like, should I do this as a story? Should I do it as a post? And maybe if we can give them a couple quick tips to think about with regard to like, which fork in the road should you take when you're thinking about, okay, I have a piece of content, which way should I go with it? I mean, how do you guys approach that?
So what I found and even heard is that people nowadays, they spend more time in stories than in the feed itself. So I would focus on stories to actually draw attention, because I think the Instagram algorithm, it really benefits you if you do more stories. So you have a better view of your post in the feed of the persons themselves. As for the content, in stories I would always do authentic content, like just really being maybe behind the scenes
Like
content,
spur of the
something like
moment,
that.
something like that.
Then of course swipe up to actually have conversions to the product itself. Maybe have some influencers even talk into the camera. Whereas in the feed I would more do an educational part, like tell about the product, what it is about, what the ingredients are, and the story more for, as the name says, let's say more like entertainment, that it's fun to watch.
What about you, John? I mean, how do you guys, obviously the other option too you have now, when somebody actually puts you in their story, you have the ability to reshare a story to your story from them. I mean, how do you guys determine what gets into your story, what gets into your feed? How do you guys make those decisions?
Sure. So the way I look at it is like, I've been doing social media for like a while, like, and I've worked with like professional athletes and stuff. So I think just like over the years I've developed like a kind of just like a knowledge of like what belongs in main feed and what doesn't. On stories for sure is resharing other people, because that like just makes them feel like special, like, oh wow, like they reshared it. But yeah, so stories is more of UGC, right? User generated content, and we also like to use stories to like, as you said, there's a lot of engagement in stories. We like to use stories to like engage with our followers. So we have like educational like days where like Trouty and John and Nate, they'll be like talking about like the differences of like the wine bottles or like the sizes. Kind of like we like to put like a fun interactive twist to the stories. Main feed, it's more of like, if it's on, because we also like to repost other people's main feed content, and if it's on main feed of their stuff, then it's that already gives you like kind of like if it was already posted on theirs, like you could also kind of see if it's potential to be on ours as well. But really just like we also have we like to keep kind of the feed looking similar in a sense of like aesthetic. So we don't want to post like anything like too gloomy, moody. We more want to be like a little more bright, a little more vibrant. That's another thing too is what your feed looks like, because if your feed like looks aesthetically pleasing and like if you could tell that there's like quality and valuable content just from like looking at the like home screen without clicking any of the content, that attracts to new followers because people are checking your account. They look, and if it looks crappy, they might not want to even look for any more seconds. But if it looks good and if it looks appealing, then that might get you a follow.
Okay. So that's all. Those are all great tips because I do feel like when I talk to clients, a lot of times they do struggle with figuring out what to put in which area, and I think that utilizing it the way you guys are talking about, and I think that's a great tip, Josh, too, about like thinking about how your feed looks, not just each individual post, but thinking about how it looks when somebody looks at your main page.
Yeah.
And what does it look all disjointed, or does it look like it's all kind of a common type thing? It's interesting you were saying just like even not posting something that's like dark or gloomy because it doesn't really go with the brand you're trying to project.
In our context, because it may not go with bright rosé summer day.
Sure.
Another thing too is photos that are in the square format perform better than like the like landscape photos.
Yeah.
So that's something to take into account. So like say you have a photo, you take it with your camera, like, and if it's not in like within the square of like the Instagram, it doesn't perform as well. So
what
like
about portrait?
Are you saying like that Instagram, like the Instagram algorithm, even potentially downplays that post because it's not in the square format?
I do think so. Yeah, we've tested before, and also that the square is also what you see in the feed. Mm-hmm. So that square is what they're going to see without clicking.
Whether it's posted as a square or not, it's going to crop it into a square.
Into a square, yeah. So you might as well take the control prior to it being posted.
Good point. I never thought about the fact. I mean, obviously you're right as far as when it goes into the page, but I never thought about the fact that potentially even Instagram is saying if it's not square, they're not showing. They're not basically, feeding it to the top of people's feed as much. So, but I think those are a couple great points as far as Instagram goes. As far as like branding, and again, I'll kind of ask both of you guys this. What are some of the things that you guys feel like an average business owner that maybe isn't a very competitive market, maybe a tip that you've had when working with a client or that you've done, Josh, when you've worked with different things, empathy and otherwise, to say how can you stand out in a very crowded space and still necessarily be authentic to the brand, so you don't want to like violate being authentic to the brand, but in some spaces that are very, very crowded, how have you guys found to be able to get a client, in your case Sebastian, or a brand you're working with, Josh, stand out in a very crowded space?
I think it's mainly don't think about the product. Don't think about the product you want to sell, but more about the story you want to tell. That's probably the most important thing, because people, they buy into emotion. I don't think they really buy into the product. So it's always the philosophy of the company is important, and also how you show it. I think video is getting more and more important. So if you want to give a message to the audience, it should be in an authentic way, mostly within a video, and maybe even with a very good post-production that it sticks out from the feed, which comes back also to a like corporate design of the whole channel, that it's you see within a glimpse. If you scroll down, that's the company, like iMagnet.
Well, it's
Magnet
interesting,
Management, for example.
It's interesting you say that too, because when I talk to a lot of clients, one of the things that we talk about is there's certain content. What you're saying, which I agree with, is you sort of have to create, a brand. You have to define the brand. You have to define what the brand stands for, and a lot of those posts are not going to be posts that are going to convert. Like, it's not the I think a lot of people feel like, the main reason they're doing a post is to try to convert to a lead or something like that. And I think part of that separating it, and I was hoping you'd kind of go there, is to say there's a lot of what you need to be doing on social media to just sort of set the stage of who you are as a company, and those posts can't be necessarily judged on whether they're effective or not based on how many leads that you got. I mean, what do you think about that, Josh?
Yeah. So your question was what can you do to like
stand out in a crowded space, which you're obviously in.
I definitely would say culture. If you could find a way to hack into what's culturally relevant and what's culturally going on, that's just like kind of the epitome of like what performs well on social media. So, for example, we just did like the bottle cap challenge, but we prior to hold on, before I even get to that, I think one, you definitely need to be passionate about your product or service, and like through that is where you could find the creativity to like find ways to like cleverly hack into the culture. So we don't have a bottle cap, but we have a wine and we have a wine cork, and we just said like, bottle cap challenge plus empathy wines equals wine cork challenge, and it performed super ridiculously well. And and like everyone knows about that, and like everyone, there's like kind of just this thing going on in the zeitgeist of like, if you know what's going on, like you're also culturally in tuned as well. So doing that, did you see that piece of content?
I saw it a little bit. I think I haven't seen. I probably haven't.
So do you know what the bottle cap challenge is?
Sure. Yep.
You know what it is? Yeah. So we just did that pretty much, but like empathy wines version.
How do you? This brings up a great point, though. I think because a lot of people understand trying to hack culture a little bit, but I've seen some brands try to do it and it just doesn't play well. It's like clearly not authentic to their brand. So how do you guys, when you're looking at like, okay, this is something going on that's culturally relevant and there's an opportunity to hack culture a little bit, in that situation, obviously there was a clear connection and it made sense, but I do see some brands stumble a little bit when they try to hack something that's going on culturally and it clearly doesn't just jive with their brand. It feels disconnected from who they are as a company. It feels like they're trying to hack culture. I think if it ever really works, I think it has to feel like it just comes from a real place. Like empathy was just already there and this just made sense, versus empathy seeing it as an opportunity and trying to fabricate something to take advantage. Does that make sense what I'm saying there?
I mean, I think it still just comes back down to like being passionate about whatever you're doing, because that's how you'll be able to creatively hack culture. And then like, so I guess we already have like the cadence of like, there's some things we're not going to jump on in the culture, but like if you know your brand and you know your product, and if you know like what your brand is about, then you know where the creative outlets can be within the culture. So I mean, could you have an example of like where like someone tried to culturally do something and they just missed?
I'm trying to think of one now on the spur of the moment. There's sometimes where I feel like there's brands that reach a little bit too much, and it's like it's something they're clearly trying to connect their brand with, but it's not really. It doesn't really resonate with who they are as a company. If it's a company that sells primarily to, just to give you some examples, a company that primarily, sells to people that are 40 to 60 in middle America, and they're trying to tie into something that's culturally relevant on the coasts, it doesn't feel like it resonates well with their audience.
That just falls under like whoever's in charge of like the marketing and content.
definitely, don't be doing something that's not within like the brand's culture as well.
Sure. Well, I think that I appreciate your time today, Josh
Thanks so
and
much.
Sebastian. I think that hopefully some people got some really, some decent nuggets out of that with regard to, some of the things we talked about. Like specifically, I think one of the great things that Josh mentioned earlier too was just thinking about social media more as a listening channel as much as it is a posting channel. I think everybody uses it as basically a megaphone to blast out the message that they want, instead of looking at it as a place they can go and listen to the conversations that are taking place and figure out good ways to engage in those conversations. And it doesn't always have to be with the emphasis on trying to convert a sale. I think if you take care of the listening and engaging in conversations, you'll find that the sales start kind of taking care of themselves as a byproduct. And you also earn the right to have that opportunity to use what we were talking about earlier, which is a right hook. Then when you actually ask somebody to check out Empathy Wines, in your case, Josh, people are more inclined to do that because you've been part of the community, you've been engaging, and you haven't just showed up to basically try to sell them something. So, you guys have any final thoughts?
I think selling always comes back to trust. And you can use social media to build trust or even to destroy trust. And everything starts by knowing your audience. So it's always listening first. And after, I think it's about producing content. But you have to know who you're talking to, then build a brand. And the sales is in the very end. But should not be the main objective of like an Instagram or brand building channel.
Yeah, and I'd also say test the market. In the sense of, say you're engaging with so sometimes I've actually engaged with like some people about wine, and like their response was like, be gone like other wine brand, because they already had like a passionate connection with a different wine. And so when that happens, you just gotta like, learn from it and like see what in the future you could prevent or like do differently moving forward. And like, just like whatever you're engaging in, see the reactions, definitely see what's going on after you say that, after you engage, after you communicate.
What's in your opinion, your most important key performance indicator, like on Instagram or Twitter? So how do you measure whether a post was successful or a story?
Well, I just go on to Instagram and then I go to settings and then content. So you
Insights?
Insights,
Okay.
Pretty much, and then you just see like the top. You know about that, right? The top performers.
Yep.
Yeah. So I just go see the top performers. Our top performers are all usually something related to Gary, right?
Okay, sure.
So we kind of just scroll down, get past like all the Gary content, and from there like we see what performs well, and like we've seen that culture is like a great opportunity for us. I'm sure it is for many other brands as well.
Great. Well, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks for the
Cool, thank
invitation.
you.